Good morning and welcome to members of the public to August's Accountability and Performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Ashevers, Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Andy Prophet, Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Constabulary. The purpose of these meetings is to help me fulfil my statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the work and performance of Hertfordshire Constabulary on behalf of the public. The meetings are live webcast to the public for transparency. It is on watch only mode, so there's no ability for the public to ask questions, but you are very welcome nonetheless. We've got a number of agenda items this morning, which I'll just highlight at the beginning and we'll take them in the agenda order. So the first is the latest update from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary closing a cause of concern in the Constabulary's last inspection report. An item on police powers and public treatment, the independent custody visitors report from 2024-25, and then the police race action plan. So we'll start then with the HMIC FRS closure of the cause of concern. So in the inspection report published last autumn, a formal cause of concern was opened by the inspectorate around the constabulary's crime recording practices, and so there's been a re-inspection by the inspectorate, and they published their most recent findings last month, closing the cause of concern and finding that significant progress had been made in improving the accuracy of crime recording data. So that's very welcome news, and perhaps Chief Constable, if I could just start by asking you just for your reflections on that progress and the continuing work that's being done since the point of that re-audit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, good morning, and good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased with the progress the organisation has made over the last 8 or 9 months. We've gone from a position of not recording 1 in 5 crimes last summer to a position where our independent inspectorate came back in May and said that we're now recording closer to 92 or 93% crime. We can do better, and we will do better. But through creating that specialist team that we've talked about before, right at the start of the process when a victim contacts us, getting the right information recorded and the right crime recorded to then investigate, we are doing significantly better, providing a better service for the public and a better service for those who need our help. And I'm really, really pleased, and it's going to continue and it will improve further.
Thank you, and it's, I think, really welcome news from the inspectorate, and I think demonstrates that the steps, the changes that you've put in place that we've talked about in previous meetings are working and have made the progress that you were anticipating that they would. I know that there's still a bit more of a rollout of that to go, and more of that happening across different district teams in September. Is that still on track in terms of getting to the levels of crime reporting accuracy that you're wanting ultimately to get to?
Yes, it is. We are completely operationalising this new process in 6 of the 10 districts in Hertfordshire. Next month in September, the final 4 districts will come online. We'll have 100% coverage across the county, and that's where the next uptick in the quality and consistency of crime recording will come from, and we are on course and will deliver it.
Thank you. I wanted then to ask about sexual offences, because the inspectorate have found overall crime recording accuracy significantly increased and improved, same for violent crime. Less progress at the point of re-audit around sexual offences. So can I have an update on how that's being addressed and the progress to be made there?
Yes, you can. A really important area. So as you say, the inspectorate closed down the overall cause of concern and said we have made significant improvement, but that we have not made improvement, and we hadn't, in the recording of sexual offences. So last summer, the inspectorate said just short of 90% of sexual offences are recorded, and of course there are a few more serious offences one could talk about. And when they came back in May, they bluntly found no change. We were still just short of 90% of offences being recorded, not good enough, and we have addressed that. The things we were missing were reports that were coming in from third-party agencies, or where a report was coming in reporting an offence where there were secondary or third offences as part of an offending history. We weren't capturing all of that offending nature, so that's where we were missing some crimes. We've specifically addressed that since May, and if I look at the last month's worth of data, this is Hertfordshire data, so we are marking our own homework here, but we do this really, really rigorously. We recorded 98% of sexual offences. We missed 1 out of 52, and I'm still not happy with the fact that we missed one. But we have really pushed that in recent months since May, and we will maintain that momentum because it's incredibly important that we get victims and those reporting sexual offences absolute support in the best possible way as soon as we can.
Thank you. And we've talked previously around that third-party reporting and information sharing, and I know a lot of work being done to address and improve that, as you described, which is welcome. And as you say, a hugely important area for victims of those really serious offences. What timescale do you have in mind as you talked about the most up-to-date internal data and getting to a really strong place in terms of the consistency of that, in terms of getting to a point where if the inspectorate were to come back, they would close the AFI? Do you have a sense of when that might be?
I think if they came back now and were happy with the 4 to 6 weeks of vastly improved performance around sexual offence recording was a sustained period, they would close it down now. I suspect the inspectorate would want to see 2 or 3 months of sustained performance, which we will deliver without fail from this point going forward. So I don't know whether the inspectorate will come back in September or October and relook at this. But whenever they come back in, we will be ready to demonstrate the improvement we have already made.
Thank you, and I look forward to having a further look at that in due course, and I'm sure around the progress being made there. One of the things that the inspectorate did highlight in the letter is a slight increase in the time taken to record crime. So about 83% being recorded within 24 hours, slipping down to 72%. What's your assessment of what's caused that slight change? Is it a result of the kind of greater rigour around recording standards? And is there any work in place to try and kind of change the timeliness around recording decisions?
There is. There's a measured target here of what percentage of crimes get, as you suggest, get recorded within 24 hours. That's really important. The victim contact us, they want us to get on with it. And there was a fallback in the timeliness of us recording crime. I think there's 2 things that drove that. Number one, the new process, the new team we introduced, and them going through the rigour that I needed for them to get it right, slowed things down. Again, we are picking that up with some urgency because it's really important. Not only we get it right, but we get it right quickly, so we can get on with the investigating that we need to do, or the referrals we need to make, or the advice we need to give. So again, looking at the last month, so how are we doing right now? The percentage of crimes we recorded in the areas that we currently cover with the new team, so 6 of the 10 districts, 93.7% of crime was recorded within 24 hours. That feels about the right place for me, or even better. And my ambition is when the final bits of Hertfordshire go live next month, so we've got the 100% coverage, that we maintain that mid to high 90% of crime being recorded within 24 hours of being reported to us.
Thank you. That's useful to understand, and look forward to seeing that kind of working its way through us. There's always a moment in time, isn't there, when an inspectorate comes in and looks at a bit of data. So useful to understand the context around that. Thank you. Really welcome the progress that's been made. There's been a lot of focus from you and the constabulary on it, and it's good to see the impact that has had and the direction of travel there. So thank you.
And if I could just add, Commissioner, thank you, and it is really important we get these foundations right, crime properly understood, properly recorded, and then start a prompt investigation. The bit we now need to do, and I am focused on, is we need to solve more of it. And we've spoken about that previously. I know we'll speak about it again. So that's having established the foundation, the investigative rigour, and the drive to improve performance there is what comes next.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to move on then to the second agenda item on police powers and public treatment, which is one that I look at annually in these meetings, given the importance around police powers being used properly and fairly, and the kind of public legitimacy that sits around that. We have well-established independent scrutiny panels in Hertfordshire that do a lot of this work, supporting me in my role, and bringing some community and external scrutiny and oversight in as well. And I wanted to pick up on a few points that those scrutiny panels have highlighted in their reports for the last year. Starting off though, there was an area for inspection, an area for improvement highlighted in last year's inspection report around the constabulary improving the accuracy of recording around use of force incidents, and some of the kind of justification that sits behind those. My understanding is the constabulary is now self-assessing as that's been closed off, sufficient progress has been made. What has helped shift the dial on that and make that progress that's been assessed?
Thank you, Commissioner. You're quite right. The Inspectorate, again, last summer said about 21% of use of force incidents potentially appeared not to be properly recorded. We have put in place since then a new process to basically grip and check officers' statements through the point at which we make arrests, or through the point at which we have a body-worn video recording, to check that use of force is being recorded. Since then, we have seen a 20% increase month-on-month recording of use of force incidents. And I know this works because some people online may hear that I made an arrest a few weeks ago in Bishop Stortford, and the next day, because I did my statement, I had my body-worn video evidence, I justified everything that I did, but I didn't put in a separate use of force submission. So the process works because I got chased by email to say, where is your use of force submission? So I am incredibly confident there is a point of failure check to make sure we're doing this, and that's what's driving the improvements. And of course, the reason we do this, public trust and confidence, accountability for use of force, which ranges from everything to, as was in the case with a compliant use of handcuffs for someone who is entirely supportive of the policing, right through to use of batons, use of taser, at the most extreme end, potential use of firearms, everything in between. It's really, really important we can describe that, learn from it, support the officers when they've used it brilliantly, and maybe coach them where there's a bit of learning. So all those things are in place. That's what the stop and search, that's what the AFI related to. So I'm really confident that we've seen a significant uptick in that. Some of the quality bits that add to that, so where a child is involved in the use of force, we make sure there's a safeguarding consideration. Do there need to be conversations with the family? Does there need to be conversations with child services? Where there is learning, there's a feedback process into the individual and the individual's team leader to make sure that individual learning may be picked up. I don't know, for example, maybe if an officer needs a bit of feedback about their communication style that maybe slightly aggravated somebody, that caused a bit of violence to come, there might be some feedback around that. Equally, if there was some fantastic evidence, maybe the praise and recognition going through. So that kind of review of how we're getting it right is really, really embedded into this as well.
Thank you very much, and sounds like a good system there that you've tested and tried yourself, which is excellent. Thank you. The report from the use of force scrutiny panel very much bears that out, actually. So they reviewed a kind of sample of use of force records from last year, and 93% of those that independent panel graded as green, 6% as amber, and largely that was around justifications and statements and some of the things you've just described. So overall, I think a pretty positive picture there. One of the things that's highlighted in some of that reporting is around, I think, some work the constabulary has been looking at around disproportionality around taser, particularly black people about 5 times more likely to have a taser used against them than people from other ethnic backgrounds. What works is the constabulary doing to better understand that and assess that?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's really important that we have that information in the public gaze and open to ourselves individually, so we understand where disproportionality happens, because it does exist. So that on the back of that information, we can then review, well, what were the circumstances of those incidents that led to that disproportionate outcome? What crimes were being targeted? What areas were being targeted? What teams were using those powers? What's the briefing and the intelligence upon which they acted to drive that disproportionality? So all of that is happening actively in the constabulary, working with our race inclusion board, working with our stop and search scrutiny panels, working with our wider community networks to say this is where we are in terms of our current use of powers, being transparent around body worn video to make sure that people can see what we're doing. Are we doing it in an evidence-based, informed, polite and considerate way? Because if there is an evidence base that says every single interaction of the constabulary was properly considered, properly justified and properly delivered, then there isn't per se a problem. However, if there's a lack of intelligence and lack of consistency, or you can't describe why disproportionality exists, that's where there is a problem. And that's the work the constabulary is doing ongoing. Now, do I sit here and say I feel entirely comfortable with the fact that we do have disproportionality around certain levels of use of force, or in certain districts, so our stop and search disproportionality is different? No. But I am absolutely clear that we are scrutinising it and checking it and working with local leaders and working with communities to understand, describe and hold ourselves to account, not only internally, but through that kind of open external gaze as well.
Thank you. And as you said, I think that scrutiny and transparency, I think, is a critical part of that, as you say, understanding the causes. Thank you. Well, to just then move on to the stop and search scrutiny panel's annual report that also provides a positive direction of travel, I think, in terms of how stop and search is being used in the county, and was certainly quite well received by the Police and Crime panel a couple of months ago. So the panel has a sort of confidence level of the records they review, so 83% confidence the panel is expressing in what they've looked at, quite a decent trajectory of improvement year on year in terms of their levels of confidence, and they're certainly describing data around growing positive outcome rates in terms of the ratio of stops to arrest, but in the context of a declining amount of stop and search. I suppose really my question around that, as Chief Constable, is, it's positive that a higher proportion of stops result in arrest and result in something being found or a positive outcome. But is there a point where you would say actually stop and search falling year on year? There's quite a lot of difference between districts in terms of the amount of stops done and the positive outcome rate. Some of them kind of just reflect reality of where crime is more likely to be, which are the busier town centres and so on. But there are some kind of differences that do raise a bit of an eyebrow in places, where perhaps stop and search is a bit lower than you'd expect for the profile of the particular busyness of the town or whatever. What does the constabulary do to monitor that and perhaps, again, you said really clearly you want more stop and search happening to perhaps tap a chief inspector on the shoulder and say, what's going on in your district?
Yeah, and I have been known and will continue to do that, as will, of course, all my senior leaders. It's really, really important. We are next month doing a little bit of an internal organisation of how we arrange our local policing teams and our crime fighting teams in the constabulary. The reason we're doing that is to become better crime fighters, to solve more crime. And one of the tactics that we're going to use to do that is proactive use of stopping people, stop and search, stopping cars in crime hotspots where intelligence suggests we need to be. And so, my expectation will be through that scrutiny of looking at the data of what we do, that my local district chief inspectors, the local detective chief inspectors, and indeed their teams understand Are they doing more or less of this stuff? They should be doing more, by the way, not less. And is it effective at driving down crime and arresting criminals? So we will have that monthly accountability, and maybe even more often than that, to make sure that we're doing the right things. There are some outliers, as you say. I can assure you that I know where we are, they are, and my teams do. For example, to talk about disproportionality against the population of use of stop and search, we know that East Herts and St Albans are disproportionately using stop and search. I go back to say it's important you understand that. That may be legitimate, but you have to be able to describe it really well. And I know both those district chief inspectors are really focused on that in terms of ensuring that we can describe what's happening there. And the overall trajectory, if you go back as far as 2018-19, looking across Hertfordshire, again thinking about disproportionality of stop and search. If you were a non-white member of the community in 2018-19, you were 6.8 times more likely to be subject to stop and search. And last year that fell to 4.3 times more likely. So there's a movement in what you might say is the right direction. But we need to be really focused on, it's not just about achieving proportionality, it's about understanding where disproportionality exists and satisfying yourself, is that right and justified in fighting crime.
Thank you. I want to just pick up on the point you were making there around intelligence and how that goes into some of that decision making. There was a reflection in the scrutiny panel's report around perhaps some of the areas where, yes, so we're saying really significant confidence in what they've reviewed. One of the areas where they were saying they were less confident was where a stop and search record refers to justification of the stop was kind of intelligence, but without really articulating the direct relevance of it to that person being stopped, or exactly how recent it was, or so on. So harder to sometimes articulate and justify that link between intelligence and that precise stop. How's the constabulary looking at that? And I suppose it's a question of improving officer use of those records and kind of articulation of that link.
It's exactly that, Commissioner, as you've said. That, so based on that feedback from the panel in relation to the articulation of why, a more thorough articulation of why, we have developed and delivered improved training to our frontline officers and staff, so our response teams, our neighbourhood teams, making sure that they understand simply to say a very cursory reason for a stop and search is very likely not to be enough. You need to put more information there. The reason I've stopped you is you matched the description. It was just seen half an hour ago running away from that shop. You've got a black top on, and therefore you look like you've been running, you're sweaty. There's a very good reason to do a stop and search and check if that was the person, versus you're just in an area looking sus, my friend. It's probably not going to be a very good answer. So we've delivered that training, and part of the feedback loop now we've got is proactively off their own back. Team leaders are expected to and are reviewing stop and search encounters, including looking at body-worn video. So we're self-regulating and offering that feedback to our people. And of course, we'll continue to take examples to the panel and continue to see and be very interested in whether the panel says we're getting this better, more consistently going forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And there's been some really useful deep dives that the panel have done over the last year or so around different districts and age groups and things as well, which is brought out in the report and really helpful. But thank you for that. That's useful. I'm going to go on to the independent custody visitors report from the last year. So independent custody visitors is incredibly important in terms of independently doing visits into custody and speaking to detainees and understanding conditions and treatment. And they've provided their report from the following year, again in keeping with the previous ones, a pretty positive picture overall that they've identified from their work over the last year. There's a few areas where they've fed back from their visits, areas that have been raised, or some of which are quite small in number, but worth just sort of asking about nonetheless. So there's one around kind of medical cover availability or delays, not where custody staff had requested a healthcare practitioner, but actually in terms of them arriving, had occasionally been an issue. I think important not to overstate it, but there have been some occasions where that had been a challenge. What's the constabulary done to look at that and how that contract has been working and the coverage of availability for healthcare support and custody?
Thank you, Commissioner. I mean, this is a hugely important area of what we do in Hertfordshire Constabulary. We've got, as you know, 2 custody suites, one at Hatfield and one at Stevenage. That's where our people who are arrested go and are looked after. And I say that deliberately because we have a duty of care to look after people we arrest. And quite often the people we arrest are in a highly distressed or emotional state, maybe drunk, maybe suffering from having taken drugs, maybe suffering from mental health. So it's really important we look after those potentially high-risk individuals well. So incorporated into our custody, and we've improved this in the last 12 months, are a contracted set of people, medical professionals who work with our custody sergeants to make sure that we get the right support, advice and medical care for people who come into custody. That wasn't in a fantastic place, I think, 2 years ago. We've since then changed our provider, who we now work incredibly closely with, and some of their coverage, the amount of people they've got through the 24-hour clock, 365 days a year in our 2 suites, has improved, which means that we're more timely and more effective at delivering that care. We have a really clear contractual a contractual expectation of them in terms of how they deliver that coverage, and where they fall short of that, as you do with any kind of business arrangement, we hold them to account for that, and there's consequences for that provider if they don't provide that. It's working well, it's improving. There is regular management sit down between my senior custody leadership team and that independent provider of that medical support. We work really well together. All adverse incidents, all issues where there was any kind of concern in custody are subject to careful review by our custody inspector, the senior person in charge of that custody suite. And we look for themes and patterns of risk or concern to make sure that we're learning going forward. So there's loads of stuff here, Commissioner, to get this right. It's a high risk area of business. But through careful work with our current independent provider of medical services, we have improved over the last 12 to 24 months.
Thank you. And positive to see that, and as you say, incredibly important in terms of that care for people while in custody. Thank you. I wanted to ask a question about food and drinking in custody. Important in terms of people being looked after, but also kind of custody dealing with people sometimes unknown coming in who will have a range of kind of needs and requirements. There's I think a general view in the report that there's good stock of different options. No major issues in terms of low supplies. One issue that was flagged was around the lack of kosher food options. So good provision around halal, but there have been occasions where staff hasn't been able to offer a kosher option, albeit staff had then gone and purchased some and resolved it and ensured that the detainee was looked after. What's been done to try and address that? Obviously, Hertfordshire's got a high Jewish community. Is there now something in place to ensure that a kosher option is routinely available rather than relying on a member of staff finding a shop?
Yeah, it's a really, really important issue. You don't know who's going to come into custody. You need to be able to feed and cater for anybody who does. And as you're right to say, it was highlighted that there were some inconsistencies in the available of halal food or kosher food, or indeed particular choices of food, because we're not running a bed and breakfast boutique here, but we have to have some kind of reasonable offering for those who are detained in custody. So we try and order ahead of time what we think is a sensible provision of food types, be that microwave meals, be that fresh food, sandwiches, hot drinks, cold drinks, including options such as halal food and kosher food, but you never quite know what number you need, depending on what happens. So what we have put in place is basically a cash supply in the custodies. So if there is a particular run of detainees of a certain requirement or a certain run on certain types of food, the custodies can dynamically go and get the right food.
Sure.
Because it's the only kind of sensible, pragmatic way to kind of plan for those peaks and troughs, because food by nature can be perishable. So we're really, really aware of it, and we've done our best to try and make sure that we've got that flexibility in our provision.
Okay. Thank you. And I think if that ability is there for staff to respond dynamically, then great. Thank you. Issue that I wanted to just ask about is around juveniles being detained. Two areas identified by the ICBs around overnight detention, where there had been a delay in appointing an appropriate adult, and the ICBs were satisfied that the assessments were reasonable and that there'd been essentially that delay wasn't the constabulary's fault or cause. But what processes are in place to raise that in terms of the appropriate adult provision to monitor it and to ensure that the agencies responsible for that are giving the coverage and the provision that's needed?
Yeah, really, really. I mean, first and foremost, only in extremis would you want a child in a police custody. That does happen quite clearly, and again, only in extremis would you want a child in police custody overnight. Where that does happen, we absolutely need to make sure, be that through parents or be that through children's social care or other agencies, we've got the right referrals and the right support in place around those individuals. And the same comes for if there's a delay in dealing with that juvenile or child in custody through not being able to access appropriate adults to the person who needs to come in and look after that child to progress that matter, that is quickly escalated. So it's something that's looked at really carefully by the custody command, where there are connection issues or partnership bits of work you need to streamline to make sure that does happen effectively. It's dealt with quickly and on a case-by-case basis, and we monitor and track children in custody, and in particular overnight on a monthly basis.
Thank you very much, and a lot of positive comments in the ICB's report, both from their own observations, but actually in terms of where they've spoken to members of the public in custody around the work that the custody staff are doing and how people have been treated while they were there. And I think important that was in a year where the custody suites were being refurbished, where there was a lot of crossover with Bedfordshire in terms of people moving around, and of course national overflows from prisons as well. So actually for those standards to have been maintained while all that was going on, I think is really positive.
And I suppose the other thing, Commissioner, that's helpful to say at this point is relevant to custody. In the last 12 or 18 months, Hertfordshire has invested in updated state-of-the-art CCTV in both of our custody suites. So we've got that extra set of eyes and ears, making sure it's a safe, clean, well-run, well-managed environment, both for the people who come in there, but of course for my officers and staff who have to do a difficult job dealing with sometimes difficult, dangerous and violent people.
Absolutely, thank you. I want to go on now to the police race action plan as the next agenda item. This is a plan that's been agreed by policing nationally to address and improve how policing represents and interacts with people from black communities. Four main pillars of it: represented, not overplaced, involved, not underprotected. I'll go through some of each of those in turn in a moment, but keen really to understand your assessment, Chief Constable, of progress against those pillars in Hertfordshire. There's been a lot of work done on it over recent times, and a number of areas that have been very well regarded nationally in terms of work done. But what's your overall assessment of that work against the police race action plan?
If I give an overall assessment, happy to talk about the detail of those pillars. I think Hertfordshire has been leading the way nationally. That's my assessment as a relatively new Chief Constable having coming in, which was, credit in many ways to my predecessor and his team. Hertfordshire has openly declared itself to be an anti-racist organisation, and we are, and I reaffirm that. That's absolutely what we want to be. We are signed up to the Police Race Action Plan in all its aspects. We have a really strong independent race inclusion board where all members of the community come together and work with us and hold us to account to get our engagement with Black and Asian minority and ethnic communities right. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? To be woke? No, of course not. We do that because we know that trust and confidence in Black and Asian minority ethnic communities is lower than it is in white communities. Now, it's incredibly important that we have trust and confidence of all our communities because that helps us police. Trust and confidence brings information, it brings connection, it brings intelligence, and all those things mean my officers and staff are better at fighting crime. So it's in all of our interests to build trust and confidence, which is why the Police Race Action Plan is so important. We check and hold ourselves to account against this really, really carefully. We recently worked with the National Police Race Action Plan team who came in and looked at what we're doing and said we continue to make really, really good progress against all aspects of it. There's more to do, there always will. We're not complacent, but we're in a really good position, Commissioner, as an overarching position, and happy to get into any detail you want to.
So thank you. That's really positive to hear, and I've seen some of that work with the Race Inclusion Board as well, who I think are really engaged and positive about the work being done, and indeed their involvement in it, which was good to see. On the represented pillar, then, so a number of kind of strands to that around recruitment, retention, progression, kind of opportunities for officers from a Black, Asian, ethnic minority background to come into policing and to progress. How's the constabulary doing in terms of getting great people in from those communities and then ensuring that they are getting the opportunities equally and fairly and on merit that everybody should be getting?
Thank you. We're making progress. Steady progress. It's not as quick as I would like. So if you take the whole of the workforce of Hertfordshire, so officers and staff, very broadly speaking, about 9 out of 10 members of officers and staff come from white backgrounds, and about 10% come from non-white, Black and Asian minority ethnic backgrounds. And that differs then when you look at officer roles, staff roles, PCSO roles, or indeed grades within those roles. You get different levels of progression. We are improving that slowly, not quickly enough. I'd like us to be more representative of the community of Hertfordshire than we are, but that is something that we have to keep working at. If you specifically look at officers, then it's a broadly similar picture. So if you take the whole population of Hertfordshire officers as being 100%, looking at the data here, Black and Asian minority ethnic officers, non-white, are representing somewhere between 12 to 15%. I think that there's good progress there, but we need to improve that. And again, at the upper levels of the organisation, the visibility isn't as strong. We are seeing that coming through, but we need to make sure that at the senior levels of the organisation we look a little bit more like the communities we please. As I say, why? Because it's a trust and confidence building, therefore an engaging and therefore an effective way to fight crime in communities. So that's why we need to keep working. It's really hard. How do we monitor and manage this? Every single month I get a managed report with more numbers on than you could possibly wish to have, but it's really important so we know, are we continuing to track in the right direction? Are the people who are applying to come to Hertfordshire representative? Are the people who are being selected to go to interview representative? Are the people who are passing out representative? Are the people who are finishing their initial training? So we make sure we understand points of attrition, and then we can put management interventions in place if we need to.
Thank you. One of the strands then underrepresented is around the kind of proportionality of misconduct and complaints processes. How's that being assessed to ensure that, again, officers from a Black, ethnic minority, Asian background aren't being treated differently or more harshly than their white counterparts?
By looking at every single case on an individual basis, understanding it's a broadly similar answer, I suppose, to the stop and search disproportionality. You need to understand it. If there is, and there is some disproportionality in misconduct against those from a non-white background, but you have to understand why that is and check the details of the case and ensure that there was rigour there. And again, that's subject to really, really careful scrutiny by me and my senior officer and the professional standards team to make sure we're getting that right.
Thank you. I think we've touched on some of that disproportionality usefully there, which covers some of the not over-policed strands of the plan. On the involved strand, you've talked about the importance from a trust and confidence and engagement perspective. I know there's been some positive work done around young black people through the Race Inclusion Board work and quite regular engagement and involvement of a cohort of young black Hertfordshire residents. What have been the outcomes of that work and what insights has that group given the constabulary in terms of engagement and policing interaction with that kind of cohort of people in Hertfordshire?
So I mean, I think this is one of the things that I'm really proud that we do in Hertfordshire. So we've got one of my senior officers leads a youth people race inclusion forum that sits regularly, and about 30 young members of the black and Asian minority ethnic community come together, and we talk about stop and search, we talk about use of force, we talk about how policing goes about prioritising what it does. They look at body worn video, and they describe the sorts of issues we've been talking about here. Why? Because it starts to build trust and confidence in young, diverse members of the community. And then hopefully those individuals are going back out and talking to their friends, their fit peers, their families, and building the trust and confidence of what we do. And that kind of ripple effect, I hope, then starts to feed through to young people thinking, you know what, I fancy being an officer or a member of staff or an intelligence or whoever in Hertfordshire Constabulary, because this is an organisation that's thoughtful, engaging, open and diverse. So it's a hugely important part of what we do and something we're absolutely keen to keep doing and hopefully expand going forward.
Thank you. I think that's been an excellent initiative actually to get those younger voices in as well. And it's again, just going back to stop and search, it's really clear from the data, and one of the challenges in scrutiny is that you're far more likely to stop and search if you're younger. But actually sometimes the people we've got doing the scrutiny of it aren't the same cohort. So getting kind of more young people involved in providing that lived experience and insight, I think is excellent and really important. So it's really positive to see that work being done. The kind of flip side to the kind of not over policed strand bit is the not under protected and a lot of kind of evidence nationally around greater levels of victimisation in some crime types amongst black, Asian, ethnic minority communities. What's the constabulary doing to assess and act upon different crime types where you are more likely to be a victim of crime if you are not white?
So I suppose if you take the most obvious area, hate crime, where individuals are subject of criminality because of who they are. We track this month by month, looking at the data of what's happening on what category of race of hate crime and where it's happening, community by community in Hertfordshire. So, I mean, if we take the last full set of data I've got here is for June this year, and there were 230, very sadly, race crimes recorded in Hertfordshire. That has increased when I look at the rolling 12 months, fairly consistently from about 170 on average at the back end of last year through to 190, 213, 230. So I think some of that goes back to that first conversation we had. We're accurately recording now what is happening in communities. So 230 crimes. Of those, 171 were about race, people being picked on, abused, subject of criminality because of their race, 27 as a result of religion, 20 as a result of sexual orientation, 4 directly related to individuals who were transgender, and 8 relating to issues of disability. So we understand the drivers of hate crime. And again, if you look at the district level, you can chop the information up in lots of ways. It's important that we do. The districts where we're having the most levels of reported hate crime currently, Hertsmere, Stevenage and Watford, that probably relates to the diversity of those communities. So there's probably some sense there But the important bit is we understand what, we understand where, and we can work with communities, faith groups, organisations to make sure that our response is right, so we can support victims and, more importantly, hopefully catch, identify and hold to account perpetrators of these crimes. So that's one really important area. Other areas where we know there's disproportionality, and there can be some seasonality of this, are where communities are targeted. For example, if they've got particular religious dress or costume. So Asian gold burglaries is something that police sometimes describe, and we see patterns of that through the year around certain kind of times of the year when communities are maybe celebrating a particular thing that's important to them, meaning they're out of the home. And unfortunately, some of our criminals exploit that. So we're working really hard with those communities around thinking through how we can help prevent those type of offences, be that through safes, lighting, alarms, neighbourhood watch, whatever it might be. So we understand where there's disproportionality of victimisation. It's really, really important. I am determined that not only do we understand it, but we get better at solving it and catching more people responsible for it.
Thank you very much. And you've described there really well some of the things I hear from residents in some of those communities affected by some of those crime types, and I know a lot of work being done to address that. So thank you. That brings us to the end of today's agenda. So thank you very much, Chief Constable. It's been a really useful set of topics to cover. Hope members of the public have found the meeting useful and interesting, and there'll be a further accountability performance meeting in September. We'll close the meeting now.